This will drag it too. No period, no nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Meeting will come to order. This is a meeting of the Infrastructure Committee. And the clerk will note. I'm sorry?
The microphone.
Yeah, there we go. Oh.
Chair Klein.
Here.
Councilmember Berman.
Here.
Councilmember Scharf.
Here.
Vice Mayor, or I should have said Mayor Scharf, I'm sorry. Vice Mayor Shepherd. Here. 4 present.
Okay, our only agenda item is a continued discussion of the survey results and start considering making recommendations to the council on the next steps and considering an infrastructure finance report. And I do want to start by saying that the staff has prepared this great interactive spreadsheet, and it's challenging and fun to try to work through it all. Because at last count we have 546 different variables to play with or something like that. Or maybe I'm being too conservative. As I've thought about this meeting, colleagues, our problem is to take all those variables, no matter how many there are, and see if we can't start simplifying this and seeing where we're going to go. So I thought it might be helpful if we started out by talking about whether there are any of these projects that we would like to eliminate for whatever reason. That we don't, that if any of you feel that there are projects there that you wouldn't want to see funded unless Bill Gates descended on Palo Alto and said, here's a check to do the XYZ project, but regardless of the source of funds, that you would not favor. And we have, what do we have? We have 4, 8, 12, 4, 9, 14, 19 different projects. A secondary consideration to that is should any of these projects, instead of being funded out of what we're talking about here, be funded out of our annual regular infrastructure payments? And we did this. We've had some preliminary discussions on that as to how we're really going to coordinate what we're talking about here with our regular annual budget infrastructure project basis. It seems to me that there are some that fit in that category. The most obvious one where there's overlap is streets and sidewalks. So I think that at some point, very soon, we're going to have to try to integrate that as to, and I think that my discussions with staff, that now is an appropriate time because you're starting to prepare the infrastructure, or you're starting to prepare the capital improvement budget for the next fiscal year, for the fiscal year 15. What's our timetable on that while I'm talking about this? Mike, do you know?
Let me get on record here. Mike Sarter, Public Works Director. We traditionally start our capital budgeting in August of every year, so like we're right there.
All right, on microphones, we do have a microphone here at the table, and when we have staff, why don't we just yeah, and we can pass the microphone back rather than having people have to trot up to the semi-microphone. Okay. Well, that's my first thoughts, and if other colleagues have some, now's the time to say it. Greg?
So I think that the public safety building is in a class by itself, and I do think we have to think about that differently. And I guess I wanted an update on where the J. Paul one is, because it's hard to make this decision until we have a sense of where that is, frankly. And the other thing is, I still think J. Paul should pay for the whole thing. So there's this $9 million in here, and that's a difficult discussion. And then obviously, if for some reason, you know, there's a whole bunch of variables with that, is what I'm saying.
Right.
So I'm sort of in a quandary of what to do and what the timing is and where that is. So maybe you could just briefly.
Yeah, let me ask Brad to help. I believe the J. Paul project is coming to council for a pre-screening. Brad, do you know when that is?
I think the scheduling for that's a little in flux. The most recent schedule I've seen showed probably an early 2014 check-in with council on the traffic studies.
Okay. So, do you have the, you don't have the schedule that was developed? Because we got a schedule from you guys at one point of where the J. Paul project was.
Yeah,
And
actually,
I was wondering if we're on schedule for that or where that is, or.
My understanding from the planning department is we're not on that same schedule primarily because of the complexity of the traffic study. Interim planning director Aaron Ackman reported last week that the initial study, the consultants recommending that it look at traffic impacts when Stanford's back in session, which won't be until October. And then they'll need to do an evaluation of the potential traffic impacts, as well as the economic benefit analysis that's also being done. And as Brad mentioned, I believe that will be ready to come back to council early next year.
So on the current schedule, when would a decision be made?
That I don't know off the top of my head. I need to get back with the planning department. They're basically the lead on this in terms of the entitlements.
Well, why don't we have somebody call up to Aaron and see if he can come down. Well, let's defer that and come back and see if we have.
Right.
Yeah.
My understanding is that everything is being delayed.
It's what?
The J. Paul project is not going to come to us on the timetable that we had previously.
I think you're right, but I don't know.
The Planning and Transportation Commission is spending more meetings on it. They just had one this week. I mean last week. And it's still in Planning and Transportation, so it's, until it gets out of there, it's not coming to council. But I just stand your point, but on the public safety building is the huge variable, and you have to have two different paths, and if you wait for the planning for the public safety building to be decided, then we can take about at least a 6-month or maybe a year hiatus from this committee.
Or we could do everything else and have a separate bond measure for that, and that would be the choice.
That's my choice.
I just would like to point out that public safety building, either, with the public-private partnership or not, did not hold well. So in all likelihood, likely would not proceed with the finance measure for the public safety building. So that's just one thing, to consider, letting that play out and looking at potentially other revenue to help supplement or fund a public safety building if it does come into fruition.
I don't want to necessarily disagree, but I think it's too early to make that type of determination. But I think we have to move ahead on the assumption that the J. Paul project will not go forward.
Will
not
not
what?
go
Will
forward.
not go forward.
You need to speak in your mic so I can.
I think you guys can all, I've got 8 mics down here,
Yeah.
surround sound.
Here's another one.
There we go.
The reason for that is a very pragmatic one. If you're holding it in here as part of this grouping of projects, and you don't know what to allocate in terms of, I mean, Greg says he would like to see it at 0. Well, who wouldn't? But the various Messrs. Paul might not agree with that, and we might. There are so many different things going on there that it's hard to say. And if the J. Paul project doesn't go forward, then we really are back to ground zero, because we don't have a site. So we're several years off.
Yeah.
I think that it'll be almost a very different council that will be wrestling with that at some point down the line.
But Larry, that's a good point. I mean, let's assume we take your approach, which may make immediate sense when you think about it. But the issue is then, do we take, some of this revenue and set it aside for that? But as you said, we don't have a site, we don't have, or do we put aside money to buy a site? and then, or, I mean, I guess the question is, do we plan for the whole public safety building? If we assume, or do we just not plan for it and let some other council worry about it if it doesn't go forward? I mean, that, when you say let's assume it's not going forward, I mean, which path are you thinking about?
Well, I'm assuming that the J. Paul project does not succeed, just because that's the most conservative one.
Right. Right, it's not a value judgment on the J. Paul.
No, it's not a value judgment. We haven't, we don't have the traffic study, we don't have this, that, and the other thing. I'm just making a pragmatic calculation that says this is the more cautious way to go. And we could certainly say that we're going to set aside some money for a public safety building project. But is the number 0, or is it $40 million, and, or whatever? Aaron, we had a request for thank you for getting down here so quickly.
No problem.
Did you take a parachute, or?
I did. Yes, yes. So update on
J. Paul project.
J. Paul? Okay. All right, take that.
There's that.
The lollipop for-
And I thank you. Aaron Acknan, Acting Planning Director. So from the processing standpoint, there ended up being 2 scoping meetings related to the J. Paul EIR. There was one on July 10th. The Planning Commission at that time wanted additional citizen input related to it. They weren't happy with the turnout related to that. So we had a second scoping meeting on the 31st. We tripled the notice radius, outreach through PAN and a couple other email lists, and got a good number of people there. So the scoping period is now ended. We received a number of comments, so we're good from that standpoint. The second thing that was on the schedule was the preliminary traffic report and public benefits analysis that we were going to take forward, that we're planning on taking forward both to the Commission and the Council in the late August, September timeframe. We're finalizing the public benefits analysis now. The traffic analysis, we have a preliminary report now. There's probably going to be additional analysis that's needed to take some of the traffic counts that are associated with Stanford that we weren't able to get in the first round, and I think Transportation wants us to drill down on a few of the numbers. So we need to meet with the city manager to ultimately decide on the schedule, but we would have some type of preliminary report available in September related to public benefits for sure. The traffic analysis at this point needs some additional work, but I think that we can have some type of preliminary analysis in the early September timeframe.
And when would this bring the matter to the council? In September?
September, yeah.
That was consistent with our previous calendar.
Correct. I think we would have ultimately liked to have some greater detail flushed out within the traffic report, and we will do that as if it gets to the environmental impact report stage. But this will be at least some type of preliminary analysis to take a look at some of the key intersections and roadway segments.
And on the current track, given where it is, when do we expect to come to council for a decision?
I mean, that would be sometime in spring of next year.
So spring of 2014?
Yeah, if not, I mean, that's very aggressive schedule too. I mean, I would say summertime is more likely, but I think the decision-making process in terms of commission and council could start around there. I think it would ultimately take, several meetings, both at the commission and council level.
There was an article in the paper that this was on the agenda for the Planning and Transportation Committee last week?
Correct. That was for the second environmental impact report scoping session.
And anything of note to report from that?
Nothing of note other than there was significant concern within the adjacent neighborhoods, primarily related to parking and traffic. So I mean, some of the same community concerns that we're hearing in different neighborhoods. And then I would say a secondary concern was massing issues related to the building itself as it relates to the residential neighborhood around it. Some of the commissioners were, also concerned, about the same thing and had very specific points they wanted to see analyzed within the EIR.
Okay. Anything else? Mark? Yes.
Well, I guess I have started to take a different track on the public safety building, and I wanted the committee to consider whether or not we should do a referendum on this so that we can do a firewall if we go forward with it, actually, because it is massive. And And yet at the same time, the duty of 9 members to determine how to go about doing this, I think, is catastrophic, because I think we need to share in the community interest in having a public safety building that will actually function in the event of a major and significant earthquake, which we are expecting to have in Palo Alto in the Bay Area. And I don't feel like we have the shared energy or the shared concern. I feel like this is one of the most important, and I've said this before, deliverables that I have to produce as a city council member, and I don't want to kick it to another council. So I wanted to see whether or not we could either come up for a referendum for June of next year, and if, in that case, or an advisory vote, however you want to call it, to either go forward with the J. Paul building and whether or not we can have it scripted enough by that time, or to go out for actually in November an infrastructure vote, which would actually, we would be asking for a supermajority, and we would expect the community to support us on this. Otherwise, I don't mind sharing the problem that we're having with not getting this building with the community if both of those or one of those votes fails. I really don't. But right now, I feel like the burden is on the 9 of us, and we're pushing that burden onto you as staff, and we're pushing that out with these different schemas to try to tuck it in a way that people are just going to become divisive about and accusatory about, particularly with the way I've seen the community give us such mixed signals. Don't do a homeless ban, but then also don't do low-income senior housing. So I don't know where the community is coming from right now, and I think that this would be an important fire break for us to be able to go forward. And so I wanted the committee to discuss that concept, and or to just use a very conservative approach, which means that we will just not have the J. Paul building ready in time. But if it is ready in time to vote in June, which means in spring we have enough of what's going on with this building that we can explain to the community how massive it's going to be in exchange and what the traffic impacts are going to be and all that other stuff, and the burden is going to be to that one neighborhood. I don't mind doing that. And I think that it would be smart to do that. So
Well, I didn't want to stop you because I wanted you to get your thoughts out, but I think that's really not part of our agenda today. It's really off agenda.
well, and yet at the same time, I get stuck right there, and this is where we are stuck. We're just stuck here at the safety building.
Mark thinks you need to use the microphone.
Well, usually they come in and yell at me if I don't get that.
Yeah,
When does construction start on remodeling this room?
seriously.
So I don't know when the right agenda item is for this, but we're talking about the public safety building right now. And so
Well,
if we
we-
need to agendize this later, then I guess we need to agendize it later. But this is my problem with this worksheet and going forward on, calculating how I would go ahead and put my marbles in to pay for infrastructure repairs.
Okay.
So I support Larry's position on this, that we should assume that the J. Paul is not going to happen, but we should also then assume that we're nowhere close to getting a public safety building. We don't have the land, we don't have that. So I probably wouldn't advocate for putting the full $57 million in. I might advocate for putting some money in to buy some land and start thinking about it with some plan down the road of some other revenue that we might use or save something. I might do that. I'm open to that. But I'm probably nowhere near where you are in terms of putting on a referendum. I think it's way too premature to start talking about that, frankly. And I think we need to let the process go out normally as we do in Palo Alto. And it seems that the Planning and Transportation Commission is having lots of outreach and having several meetings and have been bending over backwards to involve the community. I mean, if I'm saying something that's not true, stop me, but that seems to be the impression I get there. They didn't get enough people, so they reached out again to the community to have them come back. I think that's all good. I think that's the normal process. And I'm also with Larry that I don't think the charge of this committee, frankly, is other than to understand where the J. Paul project is, as opposed to, setting up referendums and that kind of stuff. I think that's not where I would go with that.
Mark, you want to say anything?
I want to get to the project that we had.
Or you want to do the agenda items?
I want to hear what great ideas you guys had that I didn't. And obviously, different people will have treated the public safety building differently, and let's hear what ideas people had, and move on from there. And if, we table the public safety building to a certain extent, then we table it to a certain extent, knowing that we can analyze it more aggressively as the time comes.
I just want to say that I agree with what Greg had to say, about public safety building. Let's have a few more questions, and then we want to go to these worksheets and see where we go in this. Greg raised a very good question as to the LATP rental of $42 million. A rather large item. Indeed, we could build a public safety building for that, because I think we ought to note, by the way, that the net cost of the public safety building is not $56 million. It's $56 million less the $19 million that we could get from renting the space where it is right now.
Yep.
So we want to look at it maybe as a $36 million project, and which is still a big item. But you want to talk about the LATP property and how we're going to get $42 million, and if so, why aren't we doing it now?
Thank you. Brad Eggleston, Assistant Director of Public Works. So that $42 million figure is based on using certificates of participation to get money from a rental stream of, I think the estimate was $3 million a year. At this point, that is a fairly rough estimate. We're in the process right now of trying to work with our consultant that we just brought under contract a couple months ago, working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the Army Corps of Engineers to try to look and come up with an acceptable remediation plan that would also delineate the amount of land that the city would end up with that would be subject to development.
Who are you thinking of selling, renting the land to?
There's no customer that we're thinking of renting the land to. That figure of $3 million a year was based on discussions with our real estate manager as to what the potential likely rental stream per acre would be, and looking at a rough assumption of how much land the city might net out of that remediation.
I really don't want to see us digress, but gee, we've been talking about the LATP property for like 5 years or so, and that doesn't sound to me like we've made any particular progress in the remediation process.
I can't actually speak to the status of the project over past years. I know that we've just recently funded it in the CIP plan to do this work, to actually provide funding for the remediation itself once the planning stage is completed.
Mike, do you know that? I mean, I thought we've been talking to the state and feds about getting the plan approved for quite a while.
We did have conversations with the state about Area C, which has been cleared for development. That's about 2.1 acre, I believe. The rest of it, as Brad mentioned, we brought to council I believe it was last fiscal year, to actually fund the rest of the remediation process. So that's what we're doing now, is to get approval from the Army Corps of Engineers and the Regional Water Quality Control Board on wetlands mitigation, as well as the amount of developable acreage that would result from that after we clean up the old sludge ponds, basically. And our estimate is anywhere, I think, from that area B, Brad, help me if I think it's another potentially 4 to 6 more acres that might become available, depending on the wetlands mitigation. So that's the process we're working on now.
Okay, so if we do move forward on all of that, and we do find the appropriate tenant, and then issue certificates of participation against that, when is that likely to occur? When would a tenant be able to move in?
I'm not sure. Brad, do you have the timeline on getting the approvals from the board and the Army Corps of Engineers?
Somebody interested in doing sort of a Polynesian type sort of building to accelerate things there?
Big market for
We
that?
just recently had our first meeting with the agencies a month or two ago. It didn't go smoothly in terms of giving indications that we were quickly going to get this delineation. Our current milestone that we're shooting for is to complete that February or March of next year. at which point we can move on with developing the plans, the construction plans themselves. I think we've estimated something on the order of 9 months to a year to actually complete the work once we have the approvals.
Okay, so that would say land might be available for lease in mid to late 2015?
That sounds right. Approximately 2 years from now.
Okay. Other questions? Mark?
So in the staff report, in regards to the Stanford Sustainability Funds, it said that those funds could be used for things like the bike and pedestrian plan and possibly other projects. What other projects might those funds be viable for or allowed for? I don't know what the restrictions are on those funds.
I don't. Joe, do you have a?
I can-
Or Jim?
No, I mean, I think that I think that both the sustainability fund and the infrastructure fund are really flexible
Okay.
and fungible, and I think it's probably just more a question of to what extent does the council see that the which bucket you might want to tap into. Does that sort of meet the definition of the intention when we negotiated and discussed it? But we saw all along that this was really going to allow a lot of flexibility for the council.
Thank you. And then there's the 1.4 million in community center impact fees. What are those? And what can those be used for?
So those are collected for new developments, and usually those are used for either expansion for incoming residents, expansion of a facility, and potentially for renovation that also opens up more capacity. So I believe that the ones, if there's work like that done for the Ventura Community Center, that was one potential use.
Mm-hmm.
We also had down Coverly, that's deferred maintenance, but if there was any kind of new work there that expanded capacity for people.
Okay.
But those are supposed to be used for community center.
Great. Thank you. And then speaking to Larry's point, which I agree with in regards to using the new revenue from the current police building, how, and Joe, we kind of talked about this when we met last week, and I just don't remember exactly what you had said, but I mean, can the timing kind of work out with using those COPs to fund a new public safety building in terms of the timing?
One thing that we mentioned here, footnote, is that if we did issue COPs out of that revenue stream, we probably also we have to take into account the renovations to the existing police building and pay for that as well. So it's just, I mean, I think we foresee an ongoing revenue stream out there if we rent that area, and indeed, I think roughly, do we have a figure for roughly how much it would cost to renovate it? Renovate that site for use. Yeah, right, the existing.
We had some estimates on that. I don't recall exactly what the number was.
I should think, if I'm using $1 million in rental per every $14 million in project proceeds, that we'd be able to use some of that rental stream for the new service on debt for the new public safety building and for the existing buildings renovations.
Okay, so we can issue but essentially we can issue COPs even while the current public police department is still in that building because.
Well, that logistically needs to be worked out because they need to move, and if they need a place to move temporarily, maybe. Well, unless we build a new building, you're right. We could use it. We could issue the COPs to pay for both.
We can't. Okay. Thank you.
And on behalf of Brad back there, you said we assumed 1 to 3 million?
For renovations.
I believe that's what we included in the report. Very well.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's all I got. Thanks.
I had, Joe had sent out an email today, and this was something, if in case you didn't see it, the question I raised was, is the $8 million in the infrastructure reserve, that included all of the transfers to date, and the question that I really had was, does it include any transfers from surplus we know we have from the 2013 fiscal year? Our figures aren't final there, so we don't have any precise number, but my concern was that we know there's a surplus, and some amount's going to be transferred to the, some non-trivial amount's going to be transferred to the infrastructure reserve, and could staff come up with an estimate as to what that would be, so that instead of it being 8 million, it should be 10 million, 11 million, I don't know.
Well, we haven't closed the books yet, and we just met yesterday on some of our liability accounts, workers' comp, and general liability. So some decisions still have to be made on to account for those liabilities and what we're going to do and how we're going to fund them. We know, I'm going to reiterate what you just said, Chair Klein, that we know there'll be a surplus, but it's premature yet to say how much that will be. And Lalo needs to come, when he comes back, he's going to look at that, talk with Jim about that, and come to some decisions. So we haven't really closed.
So pull the rug out from me if I'm saying too much, though. But I mean, we're in the multi-million-dollar range. So we're not in the double-digit multi-million-dollar range, but we're in the, we're more than $1 million. I mean, for sure. So.
Yeah, well, the number I used, based on not much, but the preliminary reports that we've gotten from your division, I increased the 8 million to 10 million for my own personal calculation.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be concerned about that number.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that your rough estimate is achievable.
And we're not being coy about it. There are just some liabilities we need to be sure that we book.
I'm just saying that since it's already in the bank, so to speak, in one way or another, we ought to adjust our numbers. I'm not asking, I think it would be inappropriate for us at this point to say, well, let's also count on the surplus for the 2014 fiscal year. We're going to have one. You never know what's going to happen in the next 10 plus months.
And we did include an additional, in this exercise, an additional $1 million that we thought we could realize annually from the revenue streams that we're experiencing right now, from the tax revenue streams.
Yeah, before you arrived, Jim, we also talked about, I think it was before you arrived, about how we're going to take a look at the interaction between the capital improvement budget and what we're talking about here. Are there items, the easiest one to look at is to say, streets and sidewalks are in every capital improvement plan. I think we're talking about more on top of that, but I think we need to have some type of way of integrating the thoughts on this. On that.
I agree. And I mean, you might have said this, but I think we've indicated already that the kind of 10-year close the gap plan we had on the street servicing program, we'd gotten down to about an 8-year schedule with the funding as we projected. So a conversation with the council, if there were some additional amount, we could also tie that to to what the planning time frame is for that. Could be really great if we could even get it to match the CIP horizon itself, or to have a 5-year plan or something.
5-year plans. Governments like those.
Well, that's a great march forward.
It's a march forward for us.
5-year street program.
Chicken in every pot. So, I thought we were basically doing this so fast that you really didn't have any capacity for more money and to pave more streets. I thought I'd heard that. So I was wondering about adding money to paving streets. I thought we were actually sort of at capacity of how fast we're paving streets.
Generally, you're right, and our primary constraint is our utility undergrounding program. We're pretty much up against what they have capacity to get out of the way before we pave.
So, I mean, does it make sense to have street paving on this? I think we did have, streets for I guess it's $8 million for streets. I was trying to figure out how that fits into that, and I guess I still don't.
Our current funding level in the 5-year CIP for each year is around $5 million, 4.5, $5 million, Brad. But then we have another 3.5. I think the 8 includes the sidewalk portion too.
No, I think this 8 is additional.
Is it just a street?
This is additional.
Sorry, I didn't see
I
that.
assume it's additional to what we have in the current CIP.
That
Yes,
was
it
the
would be.
gap that was identified back in the original hybrid analysis based on.
But we've closed that now. So that is what I was really getting to, is our interaction between our regular CIP and this. And then, Mike, there is a separate item for sidewalks for $6 million on this list.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just speak to the streets amount. Given the public interest in streets, I think we wanted to have an item in the poll that responded to that. And so that was kind of a theoretical number that we said, if it was even possible to do work faster than we're already doing it, given the utilities coordination issues, what level of funding would we need to meet that goal even faster? By no means does that mean that we've already found that there's a way that it's even possible to do that. We wanted to test support for the general concept, and we're still working right now pretty intensively on trying to see just how fast can we move and what's the very fastest we can accomplish these goals, kind of regardless of the level of funding, with the utilities as the primary constraint.
And then if you could just address sidewalks. I mean, I actually think that we've really solved the streets issue. I mean, I drive around town and I really see the street paving does stop at my block. Thanks, Mike. But
You didn't want to be complicit.
I understand. It's on
Mission
both sides of
accomplished.
my block. Just leaves my street out.
He stayed away from the city manager's block, too.
I understand. But the sidewalks are a mess in Palo Alto. Does that $6 million, will that do what for sidewalks, what we've done for streets? Is that the right number?
I can't say that it is. What we've done in the 5-year CIP plan is more than doubled the sidewalks budget by adding $1 million a year. And the primary goal of that is to get us back to our original 30-year plan for going through all the sidewalk districts in town. But that won't get us to the point when we've completed that where everything's fixed. It'll just mean we've made the complete cycle. The idea for this $6 million was a hefty number that we thought would really allow us to do something in addition and get out there and fix some of the worst spots that would be in addition to the district program.
So we've done the polling. I think where we need to get to is to determine, okay, from a practical point of view, what should we do here? And it sounds to me like we've really done streets, but I think we need to, close that and say, do we need more money for streets, or do we have the right amount? And if you need more money and can do it faster, great, tell us. But if we don't, should we be moving that $8 million from streets to sidewalks? And what would it take to make our sidewalks, now match our streets? And I think that's a number we'd all like to know. I'd like to see the sidewalks fixed in Palo Alto. I mean, that's the number one complaint I have. That I hear from everyone. They hate the way their sidewalks look. And everyone knows what they look like out there. So I think that's something. And I think before we decide what we want to do here on some of these things like that, I don't know if we should be doing it. And then a little bit of staff recommendation. I mean, playing fields, I love playing fields, would like to spend it. I actually put it up high. But is that something we're likely to get a donor to do? Or is that something we should be out funding? And so I think a lot of these, I actually would like more staff input as to what we should do. And then to Larry's point, I would actually like you to bring in the entire CIP to us and say, so we look at it as a comprehensive, because there may be things in the CIP that we should do faster that we're not getting to because we're doing this. So I just wanted to make sure that we're thinking about everything and doing this from a clear-headed, right approach where we look at everything.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Greg. Actually, my way of thinking it is ignore the poll for a moment. This is, I don't want to be poll-driven, certainly great input, but I want to be practical as well. If we don't have the need for money, then a particular thing, let's not. If it's a greater need, let's do that as well, or at least identify it. When could we have this meeting on, where we could take a look at at least your tentative CIP plan for the 15 fiscal year?
I missed the discussion. Is the thought to have some feedback or input on sort of reprogramming the amount of money that we sort of have set aside? So when do you think, I mean, is that mid-October, mid-November?
What I said earlier, Jim, was that we typically get started in our planning process for the CIP in August of each year, basically when Lalo gets back, and Joe and Brad and Greg Betts and your office will convene and start talking about what to propose. The Planning Transportation Commission has a subcommittee that likes to be involved. We met with them last year in the October timeframe. So I think, realistically, we could come back to this committee in the October timeframe and start some preliminary discussions about what the 15 CIP might look like. And it's based on what's planned already for the 15 CIP and the CIP that you adopted this year. So that's where we would start, and then we can just
our
go
role,
from there.
I see, is different than the Planning and Transportation Commission. I think we just want to make sure that these things are integrated. That
makes sense.
That we're not double spending, or we're not letting something fall between the cracks, because we have these two different ways of looking at what our infrastructure needs are.
Do you have any feeling for the sequence that's preferable? I mean, I think, as you're aware, we've made more of an effort to respond to the Commission's desire to sort of correlate the CIP with the comprehensive plan. It's been a lot of sort of what their sort of their role has been. I mean, my initial instinct would be to do some preliminary work with the infrastructure committee before we get in with the PTC in some ways.
I don't mind it being simultaneous. I really don't see our role as fine-tuning the CIP.
Right.
But again, just make sure that we're being consistent with two different piles of money.
And I think the important point is that your committee is looking at the catch-up needs, the keep-up needs, and how to fund that, and the CIP is doing the same thing. So there's definitely synergy there.
But as I understand it, the committee's trying to think about all of the different funding streams that we have in time, and want to be sure that the CIP is seen as one of those funding streams, and that we program it right. So maybe the best thing to do is, when we come back in September at the next meeting of the committee or something, we actually have a little flow chart and schedule for the CIP piece of this, for the staff piece, because I appreciate the chair's suggestions. We don't want to. We still want to protect the sort of staff input from the kind of capital and facility needs as to what you guys are seeing as the needs, and then having this sort of review process as it relates to the larger kind of infrastructure agenda. So we'll do that.
Sure.
Okay, well, we've been meeting for an hour, and
Mark's getting antsy.
Never.
Have you spent any money yet?
No, we haven't spent any money. We haven't even gotten everybody's.
Don't you want to consider taking things off or putting?
Yes.
And so.
Let's get back to that.
Yeah, that's where I kind of got lost a little bit there.
Yeah.
And can I just clarify regarding the CIP, what we're really looking for is anything that's really substantially changed from what we adopted this year going forward into next year? Like, do we have further revenues and that type of thing? Because we do plan for the CIPs over a 5-year period.
Yeah,
it's beyond. It's also beyond that. It's just it's not to necessarily make changes in that,
No.
but to see the list again and compare it, and lay it next to this list, and say, oh, Are these really, we're not double counting anything, and we're not missing anything.
And there may be things that we're looking on this list and funding now, and things that we're funding in the CIP that are supposed to be funded 5 years out, that we really should be funding now because they're of higher priority. I think there's some of that, you know, because traditionally these are the things that aren't even on the CIP list. So the CIP list may be more important on some of that stuff to accelerate it, or it may not.
One thing that Jim mentioned is that every year, you know, when you take a fresh look at the 5-year CIP, some things may fall off due to for one reason or another, but we do have to go through the exercise of going back to parks, et cetera, and asking them for any new work or work that's sort of moved up on their list that they hadn't foreseen in the last CIP process. So it just you need to collect each department's projects, and that should be thought of as you look at the whole funding, all the funding sources as well.
Good way.
And if I could make a quick point, since we're talking about possibly things that are double counted between what we're talking here and the CIP, there are some instances like that. So for instance, because we've just adopted the 5-year plan, our list of projects shows a surface catch-up number of 8.8 million. Well, we just mentioned the increase in the sidewalks funding. Part of that 8.8 million is 3.7 million in sidewalks catch-up. So that's now gone. We haven't yet gone through and updated those numbers. We'll be doing that soon. But in all of these catch-up categories, be it surface, parks, or buildings, we're updating those numbers every year. And what we're looking at now doesn't yet reflect the changes that are included in the 5-year plan that was just adopted.
Okay, well, you might also want to double check this list that we've been working from. These 19 or so projects, as to whether these numbers are still accurate. I look at some of these and now question them. For example, Civic Center, 16 million, but it seems to me we've authorized money each year to upgrade repair the Civic Center. So is 16 million still the right number?
Let me clarify that 16 million. That $16 million actually was an artifact from the CIP about 5 years ago. We identified unfunded infrastructure needs, and it was a rough estimate that was prepared for removing the plaza deck and redoing the structure, the steel tensioning cables. It had nothing to do with the tower renovations that you're seeing now. It was a set-aside number that would potentially be used to do a major renovation of the surrounding, the plaza deck and the reinforcing steel in the garage.
So is that still something that staff thinks we need to do, or?
That's a good question. We would probably want to go bring in a consultant again and take another look at the status of that waterproofing membrane to see if it's really needed. This was a study that was done about 10 years ago, even before I got here.
And it's never leaked.
Well, the garage leaks, and we've taken steps to correct that. The question is whether that membrane and the post-tensioning cables are really at risk or not.
See, that's what I heard. I actually heard that it was a at-risk issue and that we had to do this within a certain number of years.
Well,
that's not true.
There was a consultant that recommended that it needed to be done, and they recommended it would cost $16 million, but they did not give us a recommended timeline to do the work. So that's what we would need to take another look at is there a timeline that we need to work with to do that work, or is it something that we can, schedule for later?
Well, but I mean, I think that's a really important issue because this is something that's non-sexy. The city's never going to want to spend $16 million.
Or tear up the plaza deck.
Or tear up the plaza deck. But, I don't know what, and I don't want to be alarmist, but, if I don't know what that means. If cables fail and, we can no longer use that parking structure, that would have a devastating impact on the city, which would mean that we should do this before it becomes a problem when we have the money, not when it's a crisis.
Right.
And so, that could be at the top of my list, frankly, of things to do because it's not sexy, and if we're not going to go to the voters, let's get it done.
Yeah, and as I say, the next step would be to actually take out that study, take another look at it, and actually do an analysis of what the timeline might need to be to do something like that.
Yes,
So we're going to look at it again then.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've started down this path, which I think is a very fruitful one, I would hope staff would take a look at all of the items, but the ones that catch my eye are next with the parks catch-up of 9.8 million. This has been an ongoing project for several years now, so is the 9.8 million still correct, or have we done part of that work?
Yeah, and there's Parks Master Plan that we have, underway for this year. Just curious what the interface between that plan itself and any of the park improvement or infrastructure needs
Yeah,
would be.
and that's something Greg will be reporting back on.
So I did want to just weigh in on these master plans. We have a bunch of, the city seems to like to do, at least this is the popular view, and it sticks in my head, it's somewhat true. The city loves to do master plans, spend a lot of money on them, and put them in the drawer, and they're brought out 10 years later, and people say, oh yeah, we never did that. And that was the previous bike master plan. We have an alleys master plan somewhere in the city I've seen, where we look at alleys for downtown. I don't think we ever implemented that. And then they're doing a parks one. Are there other master plans where we spent the money, we said we should do this, and we haven't? And should we decide that we're not going to do that and we're no longer following those master plans, or they should be on the list of things that we might want to do? I mean,
Well, the one master plan that comes to mind, and Larry, you would remember this, is the storm drain master plan that was used when the Blue Ribbon Commission for the storm drains identified the CIP project priorities for that. But that's an enterprise fund issue. It's not germane to this discussion. But
We've done 80 or 90% of it.
we've done a good amount of it, yes.
But I don't want to drift off into that. But let me just finish on this list of 19. The other one that catches my eye is surface catch-up, whatever that means, for 8.8 million.
Which is now 5.1.
Yeah, what he said.
I missed that. When did you say that?
Well, I was just saying that because that included the sidewalks catch-up of 3.7, which is...
No, that's the third category. We have one category for streets of 8 million, a category of sidewalks for 6 million, and something called surface catch-up for 8.8 million.
Yep, there is surface catch-up, 8.8 million.
It does include sidewalks. I think when we've been having these discussions, the budget hadn't been adopted, and so that's why I was just saying that we'll be updating those catch-up numbers to reflect things that ended up being passed in the budget.
What's the difference between sidewalks and surface?
They're essentially the same.
So Larry, I think in their defense what actually happened is that this is pole driven, and they put together a certain pole I saw somewhere where you had this surface catch up as sort of a preliminary type thing you go out to the public with, and it was driven that, and they combined it. I think that's why it's in here, but if I'm wrong, tell me.
And we actually didn't...
I'm sorry, it's part of the $147 million. We have three different items for streets and sidewalks then. Streets, sidewalks, and surface, and they're all included in that amount of money, and that adds up to the total of $23 million.
The sidewalks portion, I agree, is double counted, and we do need to update that surface catch-up. The rest of the surface catch-up is not the same as what we called streets. It's resurfacing parking lots at city facilities, it's resurfacing trails, it's upgrades to traffic signals and other things that were included in the surface category by the IBRIC.
I just feel like now might be a good time to ask what the status is of the infrastructure management system, because I think having that would have really helped us in being able to track all of this, and that was one of the most important recommendations and the most non-controversial recommendation of the IBRIC, and we're 20 months past when we submitted the report, and I don't know what's going on with that.
The IT department has an RFP out on the street right now. Proposals are due for the first phase of developing an IMS, I believe, next week, Brad?
Next Tuesday.
So we'll get the proposals next week, and
then we need to work with them on developing a system, and I believe there's two phases in actually putting the IMS together. So I think we reported out to you at the CIP this year that we don't anticipate really having the IMS completely operable until the fiscal year 16 CIP.
Okay.
It's going to take time to build it and get it working. And as we talked, the 15 CIP we're going to be starting this month. So
Okay, I think that's a little longer than everybody kind of anticipated that would take, but I just want to make sure that that stays a priority because this is how this stuff happens.
yeah, it is one of the highest priorities right now with our IT department and staff. I mean, departmental staff. So
Great.
It did take a while to get it going. To be quite honest, it took a while just to try to figure out what it was we were trying to put together. So there was a fair amount of time just trying to wrap our heads around what it would actually accomplish.
Okay. I thought the IBRIC had done a significant amount of work on that, but I guess there was a lot that was left to be done. But that's okay. I just want to get a check-in on that.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to are there projects here that we think should be eliminated?
I can start if you want.
Getting out the red pen.
No, actually, everything needs to get done. That's the problem. But I did have to start to compartmentalize my thinking on this. What is flagship and what isn't? And so I put my flagship stuff over in the column L or whatever that was. And I think we have to whittle away at some of it just through revenue increases and the normal ability to try to fit it in every year. So from actual projects that need to get done, I don't think they get eliminated as much as I think we need to, I have 4 categories for me were things that we're just going to have to work out. And that's streets, sidewalks, surface catch-up. And then I have I think we should call it the Roth building. I don't know if we've decided that we are going to take on a history museum, but it is our building.
Yeah.
And it needs money put into it. And so, and I don't know how to make that static. I just don't because of the leakage and everything. So I think that those 4 for me were critical. I think we need to have, and then on the other end of the spectrum, things that I think we do need to have a strategic plan for. I'm sorry, I didn't eliminate anything really.
That's okay.
And I don't know how to make things static. I really don't. Animal services is another one where I just don't know how to process that one. That one is one I'm willing to try to figure out how to limp along with until we dig ourselves out of the regular stuff that we need to get on top of.
Well, are you okay with having us look at your?
Right, I was going to say, let's just look at your thing.
Well, I didn't
Whatever it is.
move them over though, we're actually funding them. So that's where my problem is. It's where I kind of got stuck. So my regular things that I really definitely think that we need to come up with a strategic plan on is the public safety building, the fire stations, the bicycle master plan, the bike bridge, and the parks catch-up. And I wanted to put Bigsby Park over there as well. I think those are things that are safety related, which I think is.
So can you just say that again, Nancy, just
Okay,
because?
so it's the bright pink, the public safety building, whichever format we're going to end up doing it in. The fire stations, those 2 are safety projects. I think that those are things that we have to remind the community that they need upgrading periodically, not just patch it. And then but the new stuff, the bicycle pedestrian plan, which I think is evolving, and the bridge, the bike bridge, and the parks catch-up, which includes the Bigsby Park for $3.6 million. I think that those are also projects that we need to come up with a strategy for funding.
Now, the bike bridge is virtually funded.
Aren't we short $1.6 million?
There's.
Aren't we short $1.6 million?
Yeah.
Plus or minus, depending on the design.
We've used Stanford dollars on that 5 times over already, so
Right.
that's the one that we keep doubling up on is how we spend.
But we got the $4 million from the One Bay Area grant.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I know it's just a small thing, but I think it is one of the poster childs of trying to.
Yeah.
And
So,
is the bike bridge actually in the $2.3 million for the bicycle pedestrian plan?
No.
It's separate?
23 million, you
It
mean?
is not. The original figure for the bike plan was 35 million, so the
And that
bike
included-
bridge, $10 million.
Yeah, that's right, I remember that now. So those are my kind of die on the sword. The other ones, I think we need to come up with specific strategies for. I'm passionate also about the downtown garages, California Avenue and downtown, but I think we need to look at, you know, a funding source that does not tax the entire communities, or, you know, that can come from the types of strategies that a downtown district might be able to invent. And then the regular stuff that we're just going to have to try to eke out aggressively as we can in our CIP is, for me, the streets, the sidewalks, the Roth building, the surface catch-up, and I have building catch-up at Coverly and Civic Center all in a different category where we might need to take a strategic look at that as well.
Okay.
I have comments about the funding sources, but you want to just go through this?
Well, let's go through, everybody put out what their priorities are, and then we'll come back to funding sources and do the same type of thing. Mark, you want to?
Sure. So I spent a little too much time trying to actually tie the projects to the sources, and so my projects aren't necessarily in my order of priority, but I can give them to you in my order of priority, which would be similar to Nancy: fire stations, the public safety building. I do include streets and sidewalks in there, you know, depending on when staff gets back to us and lets us know kind of, you know, how much it really is already covered in our CIP and how much isn't. But, you know, for me, and given the recommendations of the IBRIC, which I obviously hold dear, you know, I think it's important for us to take advantage of catching up and identifying the resources to catch up on the things that have gone neglected, and that includes, to a certain extent, the streets, the sidewalks, and parks. I also had the bike, and my projects tie into my sources, and so it's hard to totally separate them, but I will for now. But the bike and pedestrian plan, I think, is important, and I think this is an opportunity for us to you know, fund a large chunk of it, if not all of it. The downtown garage is important. I then kind of had a laundry list of items that I left in the projects section, just because, I mean, I guess frankly because they weren't as high of a priority for me. Not to say that they aren't things that I don't think we should do, but I don't necessarily think they're things that we should, you know, put out a bond measure for, or you know, weren't at the height of my list. I need, in some, you know, some aspects of it, I just don't know enough about the projects and the needs, you know, to really be able to determine how high of a priority they are. But of the other ones, and then the bike bridge, of course, I mean, is something, but as Mike kind of mentioned, that's not going to be that difficult to take care of. I mean, the Cal Ave garage is probably the next on my list of things. I'd still like to get a bit better understanding of what the surface catch-up really entails, just in terms of ticking it off of the items on that table. That's kind of where I'm at, I guess. Some of the other things I think are secondary to me.
Greg?
So I thought about it a little bit differently. So I'm going to take the public safety building first. I think we definitely want to do the public safety building. So I think the way I'm thinking about it is if we don't do the J. Paul project, if we do it and we get the public safety building, we don't think about it anymore. But I actually take the public safety building out and I take the $42 million COP from the Los Altos rental facility, and I say to myself, we're going to go for that $3 million anyway. That's around $215. If the J. Paul project doesn't come to fruition, that's a funding source that we can then use to build the public safety building, because you get the $20 million in revenue plus the 42. That should all somewhat work out. If that works out, then we can, that's a path forward to go with that. So we save that money for the public safety building, and we put that aside and say to ourselves, let's see what happens, and then we don't think about the public safety building in this process further than that. I don't know what anyone thinks about that, but that was my initial thought on that. I'm with, Nancy and everyone else, I think, when we talk about the fire stations. That's probably, I think we need to do that. That's probably number one. I think people want it done. I agree. I think we should do that. My second thing really is the downtown garage. I think we really need the downtown garage, and we really need the California Avenue garage. And I'm worried that California Avenue gets lost in this stuff. So those would be my top three. And then my fourth is the bike and pedestrian master plan. I think we need to do all of it and just get it done. The streets and sidewalks and catch-up, I think most of that is probably already included, from what I gather, with the exception of sidewalks, in the CIP and where we are in terms of that, in terms of streets. The catch-up stuff and the resurfacing, I think that's a good time to do this. I don't think that's a lot of money. I think we can do all of that. I think I'd like to look a lot closer at fixing our sidewalks, and that may go up in priority. I'd like to know how much money that would take, what it would take to have our sidewalks so people don't complain about them anymore. Like what we've done with streets. That's somewhat important to me. Then moving down from there, it actually becomes harder for me to start making decisions without more knowledge. The Civic Center comes to mind. Is this an issue that we need to do, or is it not an issue? I really don't know. I do believe we need to address the Roth building, and we need to start thinking about that. And I don't necessarily think it's $3 million. I think it could be, we have to decide if we're going to renew the History Museum's thing in December. We have to decide what approach we're going to take, and I think there are lots of different options on that, and I think that's a whole discussion in and of itself.
Question on that, is it possible to consider selling it, or is this a done deal, this is ours?
We own it, so we could sell it, I assume. We have a
That'd be
lease.
variable.
We have a lease option with the History Museum people.
Right.
Which has been extended any number of times.
Right.
And comes up again in December.
Right.
And if they haven't met the terms, which they haven't yet, then we could, if we wanted to, say, your deal is up, and the city then owns the building, and we can figure out what we want to do with it next.
Okay, I was just wondering if you think we should, at that point, we might need to go in, and that's why I put that a little bit static, but on the other hand.
And I think something like the bike bridge is sort of, I actually think that should be taken out, and we're going to just do that. I mean, I think the notion that we wouldn't spend the 1.7 when we have all the other money, so I don't even view that as a choice. I mean, I almost should have a category of that we're doing it no matter what. And I mean, I think the bike bridge falls into that. And then everything else is like small, and it's hard to rank. Like hearing about Maybell and stuff, I mean, 7.1 for Charleston or Rastadero, I don't know, I think we need to look at that issue. Is that something we want to do now? Do we want to rethink that? I mean, I think there are issues around that we should look at. I felt the same way about Ventura. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. We may very well. These are sort of small numbers, most of that stuff. And so I think we could do a lot of those. Carberley, I think we need to resolve the Carberley issues before we decide how we're going to do the 6.9 on Carberley maintenance. And animal services, I mean, I think we need to decide where we're on a way forward on that. And if we're going to use that particular site, I mean, that's a commitment to that site. And that changes some other things. So I think that's a policy decision that needs to be made before we go ahead and do that.
Yeah, the animal services building has been renovated to some degree where it's functional now, so.
Right.
It's just a long-term decision.
And I will say that in looking at this funding, I actually think we could do all of these. I mean, it seems to me that there's enough funding, if we do this right, to do everything, pretty much. So we can talk, I don't know when you want to talk about funding.
We're going to go second round.
Right.
All right, let me put out my list.
Actually, before you do that, could we get Molly here? Because when we talk about funding, she was here and she disappeared. When we talk about funding, like Nancy raised the issue of how do we fund the parking garages so we don't charge the entire community and then we focus it more. There's no funding mechanism here that does that. And
That's
Molly
why
had
it's
some
hard
questions.
to rank them, because some of them, I think, the comment that it's 65,000 people, then I think, okay, that's why it's been hard to have separate conversations about this.
Agreed, but this is for analysis purposes, this is an iterative process. Something might seem the most desirable when you talk about the financing, it drops and vice versa. Yes. Well, that was
in the back,
spying
working
on us.
and being ready to help you, hopefully.
Well, my list is very similar. I think actually there's a growing consensus. For the same reason that Greg wanted to take off the bike bridge, I put it first, just because it is such a slam dunk that how can we not do it when we have 90% of the funding in place from other sources? So I would agree that I think that we can take it off our list, really, moving forward, because it's going to
The bicycle bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But only because we're committed to doing it.
Well, you have already identified, I think it's $9 million in
Yep.
funding
Yeah.
already, so.
Yeah. And the 10 million
CIP.
depends on the it ought to go on a separate place on the list, because we may fund it, for example, out of the Stanford money.
But the Stanford money's in here, that's the problem.
Oh, no, we
When we drag it over, it's like,
then we have to do it. And actually, that I've been meaning to say, we need to have another column to keep, or some other source to keep track of how many times we're spending the Stanford money. I think we can't spend it more than twice.
well, it is Stanford money, so we can keep printing it, right?
That's-
Stanford dollars.
That's the rumor.
Well, the top of my list even is the public safety building. And this is just saying what I would like most for us to do, even though I've also said that I don't see how this fits into our present listing, but I like the way Greg has suggested that we look at it. And I think actually that is the way we have to look at it, that if we do a deal with J. Paul, fine. And one way or another, we'll find the financing for it. We have a variety of COP projects. I'm not necessarily agreeing that the Alto treatment site is the best one.
Yeah.
Because maybe I've just been hearing about it so long that I'm skeptical about it.
But we are proceeding with the
I know,
OATP.
but I've heard that before. But we have, what do we have? We have a half dozen or so COP
Eligible.
And even more than that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 different ones that you guys have identified. And, which ones work the best? I don't know at this point, but I think that that would be how I would want to see the public safety building go forward if we can't do a deal with J. Paul that makes sense for the community. So my next were the fire stations, the downtown garage, and let me stop at the downtown garage because Nancy had a question for you, Molly.
Yes.
On well, I'll let Nancy ask her own question.
Well, we have two things that are downtown related, California Avenue and University Avenue, and I wanted to figure out if there's a way that we can recreate downtown districts in order to bulk up on some of these two parking garages, one for Palo and one for downtown, or is that already set in stone with everybody?
So you're talking about doing a new set of assessments, using the assessment district model?
Yeah, so can I sort of jump in since we did the financing on the downtown garages? The old option that we had was to do assessment districts, where the property owners in the district pay for the garages. The last one we did took a concerted effort between the city and 3 or 4 major developers downtown. Without those developers and their properties and their advocacy among other property owners, my opinion or view would have been it may not have succeeded. In a conversation that I had with a financial advisor about alternate ways to finance garages, he said that assessment districts are pretty much something of the past because of Prop 218. And he was saying that there are two common ways that most jurisdictions finance the garages. It's either through, and which is gone now, RDA's gone, or through COPs, that the entity, the jurisdiction, kind of champions for the garages. If there were a way to involve some of the people downtown, that would be great to get them to come board and allow the property owners to commit some funds, but the reality is that you have to take a measure of some sort for them to partially fund that. So those are kind of relative, that's the terrain that we're looking at here. The other thing that the FA mentioned is if you're willing to have a private entity come in and share to be able to build the garages. So that's a possibility as well. And I don't know whether the council members have any other
Private
ideas.
entity that would build the garages and then charge?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's right.
So
But that's not the model that we've operated under downtown. That would be a significant departure.
So I had a twist on what Nancy wanted. What I understood and it was if we didn't want the community at large to pay for it, we wanted the downtown business interests basically to pay for it. For instance, could we just put a documentary transfer tax on commercial buildings as opposed to on single-family residential? Could we just basically put a ballot measure on that says we're going to tax at 20 cents a square foot all commercial space in downtown, and we're going to use that to fund parking garages? Those are the kind of things I was wondering if we could do. I particularly like the 20 cents a square foot on all commercial space. I think there's a clear nexus between that and having money to build your garages.
I'm going to throw a wrinkle into that too, if you don't mind.
No, I don't. I'm just thinking those are the kind of things that I was thinking as opposed to, we're never going to get them to do another assessment district. And I also don't like the restrictions that come with an assessment district. It doesn't allow us to deal with giving businesses certain amounts, having them set aside for certain retail establishments at a lower price. And it doesn't allow us to do this tiered. There's a whole bunch of things we can't do right now that would make sense to fixing the downtown problems.
So I have to agree with Joe that not just because of Prop 218, but because of a series of court decisions interpreting Prop 218 in the assessment district context has become very, very difficult. The courts are looking for an exacting standard that seems to be virtually unmeetable by any existing assessment district as to establishing the special benefit and the proportionality that's apparently required now under the new law. So I guess one question about the idea, just in order for us to know enough to explore it. So this would be something that would go on the ballot and be voted on by all voters.
Yes.
A tax that would apply to commercial space in a particular part of town.
You might just say all of town, and have them split up, then you use the money in different locations, But particularly California Avenue and downtown, But yes, I think the details we could leave to whether or not it includes midtown commercial space. Maybe, I don't know.
You got to answer the basic question whether you can have a different property tax in effect.
Right. Whether it's an assessment district by another name and not following the procedural or substantive requirements for setting one up. We'll have to look at that, whether there's some way to structure a tax. And certainly there are plenty of taxes that are developed in such a way that the burden of paying them is disproportionate. It's not, you're taxing activity that is engaged in by some and not by others. So I think we're going to need to explore that.
Well, it's the commercial space downtown that generates the parking, so that's why the thought was there.
Right, which sort of suggests the assessment district model, which is not illegal. It's just very difficult procedurally to meet the requirements now.
So when we did the business license tax in that field, I thought there was something that was a tax on commercial space. Or there was some part of it in there, no?
No, it was a,
I thought there was.
graduated license tax, I think. But when you do look at the business license tax here, 46.2, that overwhelmingly pays for the two parking garages. And my question to Greg's has been something that I've fiddled around with, is what if we did a tax for everything over 50 feet? So that we can get a revenue base going there, but again, it walks into the property tax concept. And at the same time, that is spectacular. If you happen to be at 525 University Avenue, you have an unblemished view all the way around forever until.
So just sort of brainstorming here, which is always dangerous. What about conceptualizing this as some type of a business tax that would tend to reach the types of businesses that are having space, physical space downtown, and maybe would not impact, say, smaller businesses that maybe run out of a home or have no employees?
Well, this would be a graduated business license tax rather than a real property one. I'd be intrigued if you can find a way around Prop 13, which is what I think property tax, applying to business, would run afoul of.
There is a mechanism to carve out, but we have to explore it. There are ways of carving out districts within the city that are called Melrose. The Melrose districts that are used by private developers. But the last we talked about this, there are ways using the Melrose district to carve out, by address, certain districts within the city. And we can certainly resurrect that idea and explore it. The businesses wouldn't vote on it necessarily. It would be the residents. It could be the residents of the city that vote on it. So that is something, but it does take a vote, and I believe I can't remember if it's 2/3 or a majority, but we can go take a look at that too.
Yeah, I don't remember either, John.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. That's another option.
Nancy, I just want to point out that the business license tax, which is very straightforward for us to do,
Yeah.
Pledging that we would use the money for parking garages, not legal. Yes, we are. We can say that.
It could be a companion measure.
Companion measure saying that we will, not legally binding, but
It's an intention, it's advisory, but it certainly in this community that carry a lot of weight with the subsequent policymakers in terms of making that.
It's a COP for $46 million.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So
Now, is this a business license tax or a registry?
this was a tax,
Okay.
but it was, the $3 million was modeled on the last measure that was brought to the voters. The measure was based on the receipts from businesses. And the three, if you'd like to hear, the maximum annual tax was going to be $30,000 for all categories except retail. And then the maximum annual cap for retail was $20,000. And there had been a small business exemption that was recommended, but then there was a minimum tax of $75. So it was a little bit complex, but and it applied to all businesses.
A little bit complex. It was extremely complex. It was horrible.
Won't revisit it.
Remember, I signed the ballot initiative against it. You did?
So
I
I
did.
think there was a desire for more simplicity.
Yes.
But it gives us an idea.
It does give you an idea. The amount can be tailored, or depending on, how much you want to bring to the voters. So there was no magical number. The committee, I think the council at that time thought $3 million was a reasonable.
Well, that was to plug the three-tier strategy.
That's right.
This is a strategy for trying to, get to that level of support for the
That's
issues
right.
that we're having.
Yes, it was 4.4 to start off with,
Right.
and it was brought down to 3.
Because even up in the research park, I keep hearing that California Avenue is their lunch table, so it's not like people are not very fluid all over trying to get to access. So it's
I think we've finished our round of priorities on particular projects, but I want to give everybody a chance to talk about funding sources. Greg?
So, all right. Thank you.
I'm sure you're not going to remember.
So I think the number one funding source we should do is the TOT. I think we should put that on the ballot. It takes a majority vote, right? TOT tax, if we do it at November 2014.
Simple majority in a general municipal election for general governmental purposes, you could do a companion measure, yes, if you want.
You know, I think you could do the COP from that. Frankly, I would go from 12 to 15%, gives you 3% on it. Rates roughly 37 million in the COP. It's a fairly big number. I think it's a slam dunk. 62% support for that. And you only need a majority. I mean, I think hands down that's the one that wins.
With 62% support on a 2% increase, right?
But I would bet there's very little difference in terms of the polling. I mean, we could repoll, but I mean, I'd be shocked if it made a big difference on 14 or 15. And, you know, I think that's the easiest one. It provides us, you know, I'm just going to round up, provides us roughly $40 million. I don't know if this number includes the, you know, the new hotels that are coming online when we did this or not. So, I mean, I'm going to say it roughly provides us $40 million. And I think that's the easiest one to do it.
It was a separate number.
Right. So, well, no, that was for just taking the new hotel revenue and COPing it, as opposed to this is the 3%.
This is just the increase.
This is just, right.
Percentage that you were talking about.
Right.
That's right.
So anyway, I would do that, I think, is number one. And then, you know, if we need another part, I probably would go with the 33.6 million in COPs from new hotels as well, if we need that. Gets me up to 77 million. You add the Stanford funds in, you add the Stanford sustainability funds, you have the infrastructure reserve, and you're roughly at $100 million over there, right there. That struck me as the easiest way to finance this, and then we still have the LATP stuff in reserve when we need that, which is another $50 million. And I think we should make a policy decision and take it to council on the board reader. I mean, it's $11 million. It's easy versus an aesthetic choice. And I think it's just a simple up and down policy decision, in my view, at council about whether or not we want to do that. And I think we should get that done, do a staff report, put it on, and make that decision. You know, and obviously do public outreach and all of that. But I think we should, instead of just letting it sit there.
Can I ask can we do Q&A? Where do we rank right now on the TOT in comparison to other cities?
That information, we supplied that information once before, but we are on the high side relative to the cities that surround us. The ones that are at the high end are to the north and the south, San Jose.
Can I address that?
San Francisco, yes.
So if you look at the cities that are comparable to Palo Alto, you know, places like Santa Barbara, you know, my recollection is that they're at the high point. I think they're at 14 or
14, I believe there's 115 Anaheim.
right. And Anaheim's at 15. You know, if you look at Sunnyvale, I mean, not to diss Sunnyvale in any way, but
Except you're going to diss Sunnyvale.
It's not a destination, right? I mean, when you're looking at hotels, you're not saying, "Oh, I want to go stay in Sunnyvale." You're saying, "I want to stay in San Francisco. Or I want to stay in Palo Alto." Frankly.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I was just curious as to where
No,
we.
but I mean, I think to look at the surrounding cities and say, you know, it's not. And the quality of hotels, frankly, in Sunnyvale are not the same as the quality in Palo Alto. And I think we have to be realistic about what we're looking at on that, you know? And so I don't think that's the right thing. I think when you look at cities that are like Palo Alto and tourist destinations, what's San Francisco at?
I believe it's 14. Do you remember, Joe?
I'm looking for it right now. I should be able to
I've got it
find it.
upstairs.
It's really high.
I want to give a different number of response to you, Mark.
San Francisco is 14, you're right. And Oakland is 14, 12 for Menlo Park, 12 for East Palo Alto, 15 for Anaheim, 12 for Santa Barbara, 12 for Redwood City.
And we're 12 right now.
And we're 12 right now, that's right. And we increased it about 6 years ago.
When we increased it from 10 to 12, we were one of the leaders in going to 12.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and of course, the usual hue and cry that we were going to drive people out of Palo Alto to Mountain View or Menlo Park, which were then, I think, at 10. Didn't happen. And what has happened is Menlo Park has gone to 12.
Mm-hmm.
So would the same thing be true if we went to 14? I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
No, and I wasn't, it was literally a question for information. It was not meant to imply any sort of opinion whatsoever on the TOT. It obviously polls very well, and I don't disagree with what the mayor said in regards to his comments about how great Palo Alto is. I won't comment on Sunnyvale.
I like Sunnyvale.
Me too.
Mark, you want to talk about sources?
So I kind of took I tried to bend over backwards to have as few COPs as possible for a couple of reasons. One is I wanted them in reserve when inevitably we get into trouble on something like the public safety building. And I think that there is, what's the right word? Support in the community for funding some of these projects that we've identified. At first I said, all right, let me do this in a way that we don't have to go out for a bond. And then I kind of, this afternoon, changed my mind. And I think, we should seriously consider going out for a bond to fund some of these programs so that we can have these future increased revenues for future problems that will inevitably come up, like pensions and healthcare obligations and things that we know are going to happen in terms of it needing increased funding for them. And so I had us going out for a bond. I had it at $48 million to cover the fire station, street sidewalks, parks catch-up, and approximately half of the bike and pedestrian plan. I had the Stanford sustainability funds covering the other half because from what I'd read, it seemed like that was the only thing it would cover, although Jim earlier said that it sounds like there's a lot more flexibility there. I kind of split off the public safety building, and what I did was I'd said hypothetically, let's say that we get half of the public benefit that we anticipate. So I had us at $33 million. The city needing to cover $33 million for the public safety building, which is the 9 that we had up there, and then 24 of the 48. And I had us using COPs for the future rental revenue from the current police building, plus about $13 million from the Stanford infrastructure and housing funds. I'd love to see us keep some of the Stanford infrastructure and affordable housing fund non-allocated, because I think given recent decisions the council has made and future issues that might come up, it makes sense to it's a policy decision, but maybe we decide that we want to allocate some of those resources for programs that help those who are struggling. And then the infrastructure reserve COPs on the digital reader board, which I agree we should figure out if we're going to do it or not. The downtown parking in lieu. I kind of had those 3 covering the downtown garage, which seemed to add up. But the TOT looks very good if we decide to use it. I was trying to have as few COPs as possible, but maybe that's a strategy that doesn't make sense for reasons that I'm not thinking of.
Nancy?
Oh, thanks. First off, I'd like to say that I think we do. I agree that we should take the digital board to full council. I actually also think we should take the auto dealership at MNC to council or do something with it, because I just don't see a real future with auto dealerships, and I worry that we end up having another problem quickly, actually. I think that things are shifting based on the way
That Tesla auto dealership sure doing us well.
Well, I think it's actually kind of risky at this point in time, so I would like to see. So, that said, those 2 things I think we should take for a policy decision, so that we can.
I have trouble. What are we taking to the council?
The digital board.
We have no proposal. What are we discussing?
Then why is it here?
Right.
Because it's a possibility, but you don't take something to the council for policy decision unless you have something that's more concrete than what we have right now.
Okay, I was just supporting Greg and his interest in doing that.
Well,
so
my interest is, let me just clarify, my interest is having you guys make it concrete
yeah,
and bringing it to council
yeah, that's kind
on
of
an up
the
and
way I
down vote.
understood
And if we need steps to have council consider an RFP, or however you make it concrete, we need, and if it fails that, it fails that, but we need to.
And then we take it off this list and we don't sit there and plug it in.
The council made a policy decision to pursue the Honda dealership or any other dealership on the municipal service center.
When did we make that?
Oh, 2006, 2007.
Oh, before I was here, okay.
That's before you were on the
All right.
council. And it was, negotiations were moving along, and then the
Economy fell.
kind of fell apart in 2008, and the dealership wasn't interested in negotiating anymore. But I think Jim has said that he's had some conversations.
Okay.
But obviously I don't know where they.
So let's talk more about the MFC.
This is the first time I've heard that we have a policy to do this and that it was voted on, so that's new.
Okay, it was certainly being pursued.
Well, I know it's being pursued because it keeps coming up every time. Even though a couple of us speak against it, it still is on here.
You're opposed to us doing a dealership, an automobile dealership there?
Yeah, I've said that a couple of times
Well,
publicly.
then you ought to put something on the council agenda so that to see, because you could say to stop any negotiations, which is the reverse of.
Once again, this is new to me that we actually had a policy to go forward on that, so I guess I need to just get better information about what it is, where we are with it, that type of thing. So,
But I think Nancy has a good point, is if we don't do a Honda dealership, what else could we do with that land, and would it create revenue?
right.
You know, I mean, sure, and you know, I haven't thought about this, I'm thinking off the top of my head a little bit, but you know, the land goes right up to the bay, right? There's recreational possibilities. You could have incredibly interesting restaurants and shopping and retail revenue and other stuff like that. I mean, I don't think a dealership is the only thing we should look at. There may be other revenue from other ways of doing that that may actually be more interesting for the community in terms of recreational purposes and stuff.
The property doesn't go to the bay.
It doesn't?
No.
Well, it overlooks the
Marshlands.
marshlands, and there are conduits out into
Yeah,
it. So it's
well,
hard.
I don't, this is ancient history, and you would certainly have, I don't want to get it's off agenda. But the history is that this was a push-pull situation. The dealerships at that time were threatening to leave town but prior to 2008 if they didn't have highway frontage. So it wasn't just the city was looking for money, it was also trying to preserve what it already has. And what was being discussed at that time was even a trade of property that the Honda dealership would in some way trade the property where a dealership is on Embarcadero, somehow in exchange. Never got the point of being written down, so again, it's sort of vague. But it wasn't just the city trying to maximize its profits, it was trying to also, at one level, just trying to preserve its present revenue stream.
Sure. Well, I can understand the effort on all of that. I just am not as familiar with the history of it in the background as you are, so
But all of this is 5+ years ago, and the world changes. So where it is in 2013, certainly appropriate to find out.
So getting back to the core funding mechanisms, I actually have a GO bond top of the list. I do believe that we needed to do the projects that we have, especially the safety projects. And I would like to have more freedom, actually, to do what we need to do with those safety projects instead of just, rest on a public benefit that will create some controversy in the community. I'm pretty sure there's going to be controversy on that. So I have that. I have my next one is the Los Altos treatment plant revenue, the COP for that. And since I cut my interest down to the bulk of doing pedestrian plan and bike bridge, I put the sustainability funds in there, and then also the police building rental funds in there as well. So the police building rental and the GO bond kind of line up. Sort of, it doesn't even really line up to do the fire and police building, but I think that I would like to have the community join us. And I think I spoke to that earlier, so. And I can't seem to separate it. I think I'm sort of like Greg, where I do have thinking about this, but I don't I don't want the community to not join us in the decision on the public safety building and the fire COPs, or the fire CIPs. And after that, I think that it's a no-brainer to just put the business license tax in bundled with the parking structures.
So I'd just like to address the community joining us. I think the community wants a public safety building, but they don't want to pay for it,
I don't
right?
think we know that yet. I
No,
think they pulled for that, but I think it's so premature to.
So I
write it off.
think the community is joining us and has already says they want a public safety building. We know that. So we know that they're joining us. It's a separate issue of how they want to pay for it. It's a separate issue, and I think we'll lose on a bond for it. But putting that issue aside, it's a separate issue about whether and how they wish to pay for it. If they wish to pay for part of it through some other tax or some other COP or some other revenue, that we have, or whether or not they want to do a geo bond. I still think they've already made the decision to join us, and I think if you ask people if they want a public safety building, they do.
Okay, my turn to talk on that. I, in general, or agree with the approach that Greg has outlined. I think that this is the way I look at it. We have, I counted, about $47 million presently available between Stanford and our own reserves. And that's subject to our further analysis on what our budget, our surplus was this year for a little bit, and I have a feeling that our proposed expenses are going to come down after the staff reviews this. So $47 million on hand. If we just did, for example, the certificates of participation on increasing the transit occupancy tax to 14%, and the new ones that are coming online, that would produce $60 million COPs, which gives us about $107 million, which to me is more than enough, I think, to cover all of these things that are on here, except for the public safety building. And we sort of separated that out, and then the COP potential there from the business license tax, I think would be able to cover that if indeed we don't do a deal with J. Paul. Having the community join us sounds good. If it were a democratic process, I find 2/3 votes very undemocratic. The idea that 1/3 of us can, in effect, veto what 66.5% of us want, I think is, I don't see what that means. I don't like it. I think you should go by majority vote. And a bond measure means, of course, a 2/3 vote. And if you look at all of the polling that we've had 5 years ago and now, a majority of Palo Altans in the high 50s do favor a public safety building and are willing to pay for it. But that doesn't get us there under present law. So, and if with the approach that I think that Greg and I are taking in general, is democratic. If people don't like what we're doing on that, they can vote out people, they can recall them, they can find new people or whatever. But I don't see any point in going to a bond measure unless we absolutely have to. And I think that our resources clearly allow us to move forward. And then each of these taxes that we're proposing for COPs, citizens vote. And you have an advisory measure on there that says we want to, and this has been done over and over again, that says if you pass this transit occupancy tax that increases it 2 or 3%, whatever, the companion measure says council has every intention of using this money to help finance pick your projects. So it does have that way it does allow the majority to speak, and I think that's important. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we have all of these potential resources, and I think I'm also encouraged by the fact that I think that we've already been eating into some of these projects, so that our cost is will also be coming down. And, we don't have inflation that would in many of these prices.
Sorry, just to clarify, what were you planning on using to fund the public safety building if
I'm certainly not committing to it. I'm just saying, here's an example of what would work.
Okay, except for the fact that in the past it's shown that we can't get the support for that idea in the community for that amount of money.
But we have might choose one of the other ones.
Okay.
The BLT, is that what you're talking about, Mark?
Yes.
Make a list, man.
Not from McDonald's or wherever you get BLT.
I know, but we don't get you.
Larry, you looked at me like I was a little bit crazy when I mentioned the fact that for a lot of reasons it's very justified. But when I mentioned the fact that down the road we're going to have increased obligations. And I guess the concern that I have with using COPs, to cover everything, is that we're locking in that additional revenue from those sources for 30 years, and I just don't. I'm not fully comfortable yet with using COPs for everything, especially if we have an opportunity to. If there's support in the community for things like fire stations and the parks catch up and the bike pedestrian plan, I don't know why we're so hesitant to take advantage of that support to fund some of these projects and keep the flexibility moving forward of some of these other revenue sources that are coming online or may come online. I'm not saying, I'm not committed one way or the other, but I think it's a discussion worth having.
I think it's a discussion worth having, and hoping to see the same type of discussion discussed in today's New York Times as to the city of Chicago's financial problems, which are far, far worse than California's. Illinois and Chicago rank at the bottom in terms of pension coverage, and whether they're going to increase taxes to cover their pension obligations is a very sore point, and it seems like that's not very likely. But that's Illinois, and that's their own problems. But there is a common denominator, and I think that the only expenditures that we're really talking about that are out of hand, or potentially out of hand, are health costs, health insurance, and pension. I think people are not going to be very happy to vote for a tax increase to cover those.
No, but I agree 100%, and that's why I'm saying that I think we should, if we have identified increased revenue like this $2.4 million from the new hotels, I'd rather keep that revenue available for those expenses and right now use a bond for the things that people support. Because I agree with you 100%. I think 15 years from now, there's no way the community is going to approve a tax increase to fund pension or health care obligations. And I'd rather keep that revenue available for those, the revenue coming in annually available for those expenses.
So I think one of the things is you don't get to put too many measures on the ballot in 2014. I don't think it's a GEO bond and the TOT tax. I think that the community is saying, well, wait a minute, they want too much out there. They're double dipping. I think you only get to put one, frankly, and I think.
But which one are you choosing?
I choose the TOT. I mean, I think anything else is silly.
But don't you also have the new hotels?
The new hotels is a different. The new hotels is a COP. You don't put that on the ballot.
Oh, fair.
The new hotels the revenue's going to come in.
So just the TOT would have to go on the ballot.
Right. So your argument really is that we shouldn't use that 2.4 million now because we should save it and reserve the flexibility to fund,
whatever comes up.
Runaway pension and benefit costs. And I think that's a little disingenuous for the community. I don't think that's what the community wants. I think the community wants us to deal with infrastructure
And I'm saying that the community should do that, but actually on my list, I only have one thing, and maybe the police building, but that's not, I only have one thing. My one thing would be a bond, though, instead of the TOT.
Well, but I think the difference is that you only get one. You could do the TOT, but a bond, you're just basically saying that you'd do a $70 million bond is what you're looking at.
48.2.
40, well.
And use the Stanford funds, use the police building.
So if you do the TOT, you're at about 40 million as opposed to 48. If you
Correct.
do 15%. So then you wouldn't have to do, I would do the hotels, frankly, but then you wouldn't. And I'm not sure you need to. I mean, if you're just raising less money. If you're doing a geo bond for 48, and I'm saying let's do a TOT at 40, it's a difference of $8 million.
Correct.
And you're likely to win that. Your fight is not with the TOT. Your concern is with the 33.6 for the new hotels.
In concept, that my fight is with that concept. Yes, not with that specific item.
My problem with it is A, bonds are, as I said, democratic. The other thing is you're rolling the dice. When we get over 2/3, as we did with the library bond measure 5 years ago, in a remarkably strong campaign, we still only got a little over 69%. You don't have much of a cushion on bond measures at all. So no matter how desirable it seems, I think you always have a risk on bond measures.
Sure. With any campaign.
25% of people are running against it no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I could just interject.
And I just wanted to add.
No, that's a very.
But once you lose on a bond measure, history says you got about a 5-year time frame before you come back.
Forever. I just wanted to interject. So the 38 million is based on the 4 projects that pulled above 2/3. But if we looked at willingness to pay, as we did in the survey,
72, I think,
it
right?
was 72 million.
Yeah. So I mean, my 48 was
Would
being pretty
generate up to-
conservative. You know, in the, you know, towards that strategy of creating a number that's as digestible for the community as possible.
My thinking changes too if they stop taxing on making these tax-free. And all of a sudden it's like a COP, and I guess that's something that might happen this year. We just got an alert to that effect today.
Oh, with the bonds?
Yeah. So.
Today?
Today.
Just good. Yeah, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
Well, there can be an alert, but Congress is in session right now.
Right, but it's going to, it's part of the tax plan, and it's not seeming to go away. It seems to have both Democratic and Republican support. So the geo bonds might not be the way I would want to go. One of the reasons why I'm interested in a geo bond is it's the cheapest thing to do. It just is the cheapest, and we get more bang for our buck with that. And the community, I mean, I was at this is anecdotal, but I was at the Green Acres, the Green Meadow Parade, and they're trying to figure out how to do their infrastructure on their community center because it's old. And they're having all the conversations that we have with Stevenson's house that has to go back in and rebuild seismically fit and everything. I said, we're having that conversation all over town. Palo Alto sort of rolled out at a very similar period, and it's all on our shoulders to try to figure this out. But if the geo bonds stop becoming a deal, that
Sure, totally changes the calculus. And I'm not saying I'm against that. You know what you guys are proposing. I'm just not. I have some thinking to do about it, and some more. You know, and I don't know if what you guys were proposing it was to decide at today's meeting to totally cut off the possibility of moving forward with a bond. Then I'm probably a little antsy.
I don't think we're ready for any decisions yet.
Well, then
We need information from them to come back on better numbers, too.
yeah.
No, I think we're, thank you for the introduction, Mark, second now segue to that.
We planned that.
I think we've probably got done about as much as we can get done today. And we need more, you guys, the staff to reanalyze those numbers and come back to us with whatever's appropriate. And I think that all 4 of us should take what we have hit now and do version 2.0 of our thinking.
Come back with the CIP information.
Yeah, the CIP, right. And so next meeting, in, what, 3 or 4 weeks? 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
As soon as we can get it to
I'm going to be out of town at the end of this month, but
No, there's not a lot of
Well, as
work.
soon as we can get the information together and get back.
Yeah, well, let's set it up for the, what are we here? We're here at the,
6.
first Tuesday in August, so first Tuesday in August is the day after Labor Day.
In September.
September.
As I said, August?
Yeah.
Said August.
First Tuesday in September is the day after Labor Day.
Correct.
Just to clarify a little bit, what obviously can be brought back is the current CIP plan. Well, one is to scrub the information on the costs for the different categories that we have here.
Correct.
2 is to sync up what's here, or look at syncing up and comparing what's in the 5-year CIP. The only piece that would be missing by next month is input from departments.
Right.
Am I saying, just to clarify what we can and can't do in another month, unless something gets accelerated by asking departments for information.
I don't think that would really be possible, but what Jim was mentioning was coming back with a flow chart and schedule for how that process works. And how
Whatever
we
you have,
tie
that's
this
not-
How we
process
integrate the
into that.
CIP development with the infrastructure.
And
So do we decide on September 3rd, or is that it?
6.
Six.
Oh, September 3rd, is that the first Tuesday?
That's
Yes.
the first Tuesday.
September 3rd?
Can I ask a question before, it's the day after Labor Day. It's been hard getting back from my other vacation.
You need to stop doing that.
What?
I'm going on vacation.
You've been on a lot of vacation.
Hey, now.
I want to understand though too, because now I'm starting to hear that we only want to put one ballot measure on. And I do differentiate between the geo bond, which would be very resident driven, and a business license tax, which would only hit residences if they happen, and I don't think it would happen if I wouldn't want to put something on that people living, working on their homes. So they would be discrete, different, but I'm also remembering that that we have to clean up the utility of the telephone users tax. And so that's gonna go on. And so do we have too much, how much, do we wanna just say that we have to pick between two things or 3 things? Or?
There's no one tax rule. Greg, I think, was just suggesting it's a matter of political pragmatism, but that's a decision to be made.
Okay, so we're not just sitting there, gee, I need to pick my one and drive it through. Okay. Well, I was hearing that in the conversation, I want to clarify.
Greg was saying that it's just his political judgment.
Something to consider.
And others may differ. And Sheila, you're going to be able to revise, you and Joe are going to be able to revise this to some degree. Maybe it's just in the last week before September 3rd.
This exercise?
Yeah.
Now that we know how to do it.
Now that we do, well, we're
I
going to
thought
have
the
to.
instructions was perfect.
I didn't have any problems.
I'm sorry.
No, we need practice, that's all. But we're going to have some changed numbers.
Yeah. Yes, we're gonna scrub the numbers. Now, are there any revenues that we talked about the project costs? Are there any small revenues you want to take away in any way, or do they leave them the way they are?
I wanted to recommend that, I don't think we should consider a sales tax. I do want to keep everything on the table, but I haven't heard anybody talk about that.
I mean, things that polled miserably.
And
I know the sales tax was a bit of an anomaly.
It
but-
was, and I think I know Fairbanks is here to talk a little bit more about that, but it was surprising that it pulled as low as it did, and absent of information about the incremental investment or anything else, they were suggesting that if we do further study, we keep that on the table.
Yeah, I'm all right with that one. I'm all right with repolling that one. Things like the UUT tax that got 29% and, parcel tax that got 41%. I don't know if it makes sense to keep those in the hopper.
Yeah, I don't think it does.
We'd be happy to take things off that we find useful, so that would be declutter.
Those two.
yeah.
Yep. So is there, people want to take the sales tax off?
There was some issue about the sales tax. I mean,
Yeah,
I looked at
we-
this and I thought that.
Waiting for Caltrain to take the sales tax.
We want to repull the sales tax. If we're gonna, I mean, it doesn't hurt, and this seemed like an anomaly. It doesn't hurt to go out again and.
Yeah, because I can't remember what our consultant said. So the only reason I might like the sales tax is there's a rule about how much you can go up on the sales tax, right? And somebody else gets to grab it rather than us, and somebody's going to grab it. So I'd rather grab it before anyone else. That would be the focus of my campaign, would really be, look, the state's going to do this and get the money. Let's keep it in Palo Alto.
Yeah. Can the state do that? I thought it was going to be
A
the
series of
VA or-
local taxing authorities that can grab
So
that
the
increment.
Caltrain is what we've been sort of waiting for.
The
them to get
counties,
some
there's some other special districts can't, do you recall the rules, Joe? Who
We
has
have,
access to the
I'm
increment?
trying to remember what the capacity is.
I believe there's a percent left or something.
0.75
Yeah.
left
Mhm.
for the 1%.
But others have already done it, so that means
But,
that.
you know, I mean, there's the BTA,
For
and
Caltrain.
We can get to the specifics on that.
mainly the BTA has a.
Well, let's just keep that one on the table.
So I think we asked the question, do you support sales tax? So if there was no, an eighth of a cent, 25 cent, a dollar. So absent of kind of any more context than that, it did not poll very well.
Yeah, I would leave it in so we can ask a better question.
I just came back from Oregon, it's kind of cool up there.
They don't really have sales
They
tax,
don't
right?
have any sales.
I was just- they don't have any sales
All of a
tax.
sudden I get, oh, that's how much I'm signing for, okay.
It's polling well, I believe, in surrounding communities too, so it was
To do
a bit of
sales
an
tax,
anomaly,
to
yeah.
do it.
Okay.
Parcel and UUT, does that take it out?
Yeah.
No?
No?
No, you haven't really come to a conclusion.
Well, I don't like parcel taxes myself, so
Yeah, I would take the parcel tax and the UT out.
Yeah, take those out. Larry, is that good for you?
How are we gonna find
Yeah.
out if we can do the TO, or the TUT,
TOT?
the telephone users tax?
What do you mean?
I don't know what the status is of that.
What, do you want us to do anything with the TUT to poll, or it's free if we just throw in a couple more
So I
questions?
think Vice Mayor Shepherd's recalling that we had a larger interest for a protective purpose long-term to do a cleanup on our telephone user tax. So, you might want to think about whether that goes at the same time just as a straight cleanup item, or it can be combined actually with a rate increase, or in some jurisdictions they've combined it with a rate reduction, because by broadening the tax you can actually reduce the rate and maintain the revenue.
And people will vote for that.
It's worked in other jurisdictions.
Well, that might- yeah.
I think you need to bring that to one of the other committees. I'd see it sort of outside this committee's jurisdiction. I hate to be picky like that, but
But it's true.
our colleagues are sometimes concerned about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps we'll raise it at finance,
I mean, it's certainly not something that's going to impact our infrastructure money.
unless you wanted to combine it.
Well, with a significant increase.
Well, I'm thinking about the strategy we might bring forward in the same campaign. Would you want two taxes? How do they play off one another?
Right, that's a bit above my
We
pay
wanna
grade,
think about that.
exactly. Right.
I just,
All right, so we're eliminating the parcel tax?
And the UUT.
I'm not sure I want to eliminate the UUT.
You got 29% support.
That's what I was thinking. Why aren't we eliminating the UT?
Well, that's what I was worried about, to see whether, well, maybe finance will ask us to go ahead and put in the next poll, to see if we can get to,
I don't care if we keep it in, but it got 29% support.
it is.
Do you have any opinion on that?
It is one of the more difficult mechanisms to pass, in my experience. I mean, Charles can chime up. So it's not surprising to me that it pulled toward the lower.
Okay, well,
I voice an opinion on that, which is the cleanup is very important. So we might want to think about that first before suggesting to the community that it be raised or changed.
The cleanup of the UUT, you're saying, is
Cleanup of the UUT is
Gotcha.
very important, and so not to muddy the water.
best to just leave it alone.
But somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the similar cleanups in utility user tax around the state have all passed.
I wouldn't take these poll results to reflect on the chances of the cleanup. It's a totally different concept.
No, I know that. That's why I'm saying the cleanup is easy, or at least so far it's been easy.
Yeah.
Have they been standalone cleanups? The only thing people are voting on?
I believe there have, I can't recall off the top of my head specific jurisdictions, but there've been a variety of configurations. I know certainly that there've been communities where they broaden and reduce, and that has been much more popular than something that is either straight cleanup or something that obviously is an increase. So there are a variety of ways that different jurisdictions have done that.
The broadening, the cleanup is important because, there is a broadening part of that cleanup. And so I think it has worked both ways, but the way to make the broadening a little bit more popular is by reducing by, let's say, 0.5% in some communities.
But that hasn't been necessary in other communities where they've either kept the rate the same so that the resulting revenue increased, or even in some instances, they increased the rate to fund specific projects.
Yeah. The UT in our community was very close, with a very narrow margin of passage when it was implemented. So I'm kind of partly working off that history in terms of recommendation or opinion, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anything else? We're taking the UUT increase off then. Agreed?
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're taking off two things, parcel tax and that.
Progress.
And we're leaving on all projects.
My day is done. Oh.
Okay, and the meeting is on September 3rd at 4 o'clock. A good time for everybody?
Sure, we've got finance at 5 or at 7 that night. 4 o'clock's fine.
Good, that puts an outside limit on it.
I was thinking we should have it start at 5. But we can do 4.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Oh, and of course, you're going to, the other thing, you have an assignment on the tax issue.
I have a couple questions to get back to, yes.
Okay, good.
So do you guys have 10 minutes?